So today's focus really is on research, helping students do good research and also turning that research into a project. Some of you have judged with us in the past, so you've seen the projects. We are very excited to be in person this year. Fingers crossed that there's not another resurgence of anything come March. But what we wanted to start with, and Cindy's going to jump in with me as needed, what we wanted to start off with is kind of talking a little bit about what makes a good bibliography. And, I am not a classroom teacher. I'm not certified to teach. But I have been with History Day for 15 years now. And talk about the years blurring by. I went to a conference, and I'm like, I think I'm over 10 somewhere. And they hand me the badge. And I'm like, what, 15? Has it really been that long? But I've judged at all levels of competition, including nationals. And so what I kind of wanted to start off with, mirroring what Cindy did at our last session about the process, the map of History Day, what the process is. Just starting off with what makes a good bibliography, because the truth is that the bibliography is key to a History Day project. The kids really focus on the project, and yes, that's important, showcasing that research, but you have to have a good foundation, and that's what the bibliography is, because after all, it is History Day. So when I'm a judge, and I have to say that I am a really critical judge, to be honest, some would say harsh maybe, but it comes from years of looking at projects. And, good feedback is important. And so what I would say when I look at a bibliography, and actually let me go to view. I'm sorry, I'm not doing a good job on that. Let me just do slideshow. And Rich, I have copies of these I can send to you. So a good annotated bibliography, when I'm looking at a bibliography, I'm looking for multiple types of sources. I'm looking to see, did the student actually look at a book? And you'll hear more about this, but a student does not have to read a full 400-page book, but they should look at some type of book for secondary research, to put it in historical context. I'm looking to see, do they just do one kind of research? Is it all articles? Is it all web pages? Or have they looked at books? Have they looked at magazines? There's Connecticut Explored, which is a really great magazine that is specifically written for a popular, wider audience, so that it's not, a high school student might be able to get through the Connecticut History Review, which is published by the Association for the Study of Connecticut History. But a sixth grader can't. But Connecticut Explorer, they might be able to. So as a judge, I'm looking to see, do they look at books? Did they look at articles? Have they looked at other, different types of, did they look at letters? And, what kind of primary sources? Is it all one kind of primary source, or have they looked at a variety? The other thing I'm looking for in a bibliography is different points of view. That's kind of one of the key things, I think, for History Day, which is looking at different points of view. It's not that a project has to show 50%. Let's say women's suffrage in the United States. Not everybody was in favor of that. There were even a lot of women who were not in favor of women's suffrage. You don't have to show that, you don't have to spend 50-50 and divide your project, but the project does need to show, the research does need to reflect that not everyone had the same point of view. And you want to see that in the bibliography. The other thing is credible websites. Kids, we tell them, you cannot Google your way through a History Day project. In other words, you can't just, go and put in your topic on Google and pick the top 5 hits. You can Google, let's say we're going to do Amelia Earhart as our project. You can do Amelia Earhart and then archives, but you cannot, I see so many websites, and, we're going to talk a lot today about digital resources, and there are a lot. It's a part of equity, actually, that a student might not be able to drive to an archive or drive to a museum, but they can go online at school. So we're going to talk a lot about using the web, as a way of researching. We're not anti-web research. But what we are anti is just kind of choosing any old website. And I know that you're doing this work in schools all over, in terms of digital literacy, trying to figure out what's a credible website. There are a lot of great websites that research can be done on, but I see so many bibliographies that students, and it's like some person did a website on it, and that's not credible. The other thing I forgot to put on here, but I'm going to put out a plea, because I see this all the time. If you have multiple photographs from the same collection, they should be one bibliographic entry. I think kids think they're going to wow you by, let's say I use 10 photos from the objects from the George Washington Library at Mount Vernon. That does not wow me to have to look through 10 citations, because actually I'm just like, okay, you're just trying to pad it a little bit. You can put the collection, and that is fine, and that is the way a student should do it. So that's just my plea to say, please don't put, if they're photos from or images from different collections, yes, you need to have separate mentions on your bibliography, but if they aren't, put it as one. So what are our rules for NHD rules in annotated bibliography? Because honestly, it's always good to go back to the rule book. In the rule book, it states that students must list all sources consulted. As I mentioned, they should combine photos and materials from the same collection into a single citation, and they need to divide the bibliography by primary and secondary sources. I'm not going to start us off by getting off time, but I do have a couple of examples of bibliographies I can share in that space where one speaker won't be with us, so you can see that a little bit more. Students can use either Chicago style or MLA. Either is fine. And annotation should be 2 to 3 sentences. That's one of the newer rules, and I'm happy for it because we don't need to have paragraphs. What you want, basically, is for a student to say, how was this source helpful in my research? What did I learn from it? And at the end of my slides, and we will send you links to Google files with lots of great resources, and one is one that Cindy shared, which is sentence starters. Students should vary their sentences and not just say this source for 10 pages. And one of the things that we know, you're busy, teachers are busy, we know that, but there are a lot of references and resources, and so one of those is you can go to a whole page on the NHD website, which is about annotated bibliographies. So here's an example of a annotated bibliography from a couple years ago. What should be on here is author, last name, first name, title of the page. You want to credit the organization who published this page and the last modified date and the date accessed the site with the URL. As you look at this, you can see that the student missed a lot of that information. Now sometimes it's not there, so you just have to skip it, but they missed a lot of information. And the other thing is, what about these annotations? What is this telling you?
Just tells you what it is. It's not saying how we actually use it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not really helpful in understanding another photo of the Long March, the Army. It's not really telling you how that was vital to your research. And the thing is with images is, and this is a hard, I think, concept to get across, is that images aren't just window dressing. They should be used as part of the research, that it's telling you something. I'm not going to steal Sadie's thunder, but they can tell you things. Looking at a map is not just window dressing, it tells you about a historic event. And so that's really important to remember. And here's another example. Any thoughts on this one? Yeah, absolutely right. They're missing annotation.
Those are just citations. Those are just citations.
Yeah, just citations. The citations are much better than the first one we looked at, but yeah, missing annotations. And here is a really excellent example. Cindy's beaming because it's her students, and they're really wonderful young people who have been participating for several years now.
This was their project that placed fourth at nationals last year.
Yep.
What did you say, Cindy?
These are my high school students. They placed fourth at nationals last year. So they've been doing this a while. They've been doing this since they were sixth graders. So they've had time to refine hone their annotated bibliography skills.
So you can kind of see the difference. And I'm going to skip this part of reviewing the examples that I brought just because I want to make sure to finish on time. We can take a look at those. I have a couple of examples from past years you can look at. I just wanted to mention it's going to be in the material we send you, a wonderful document that Cindy's put together of annotation prompts to help students as they're working on their annotations to vary sentences and be able to do that. And then we'll get to this in just a second. I know that was kind of a quick introduction, but just to kind of set the tone for the day and really thinking about that research and making sure that students are doing really good research on their projects is vital. Do I, any questions?
Yes. So my students struggle with where to place the multiple perspectives in a traditional project. So like if they're trying to argue a piece, like where do they put like the counterclaim, or is it essentially a counterclaim, or do you just want to see the multiple perspectives in the annotated bibliography?
No, you want to see it on the project. So it's hard to kind of say one place, but you know, I'm thinking kind of like with a performance, if a student, let's say they're talking again using that suffrage example, you know, that one of their characters might be anti-suffrage, or on an exhibit board, you know, if you're talking about, you know, either the historical context or kind of the event itself, you can talk about, you know, not everyone agreed type of thing. Do we have other suggestions from, I'm kind of looking at Jen because she's had many years of coaching students through 2 nationals, I should say.
I feel like this year I want to add like a resistance to section or like a counterclaim section to the project, but I'm just trying to figure out if that would help, or is that too obvious?
I had a student, one of my first students did the Intercontinental Railroad, and he, rather than put a board together, he created a teepee, and he ordered this little miniature railroad that went right through the project, and the Native American perspective was on one side and the American Railroad people were on the other. It was, you didn't even have to read anything to know there was 2 sides to that.
Was that able to support the overarching claim?
Oh yeah.
So that's like what my concern is like what if they have this claim that an alternative perspective is going to derail their argument? Like how big of a perspective does that have
Well,
to be?
that puts you in the position of making your claim and being the historian and saying, yeah, they might have said this, but here's what I found stronger.
Okay.
And you know, the other thing is with frontiers in history, you're talking about the frontier that was crossed. So whether, you know, it impacted people differently, and so that's also kind of an impact thing you'd be looking at, you know, taking the example of Sam's project about the Intercontinental Railroad. So that's something also that would be touched on in your impact information, because that is a frontier that was crossed. There's no disputing that, but it's impacting people in a different way. It's what happened to Native American tribes who had the railroad go through their traditional lands, and you know, what did that do for the railroad company? So there are ways of including that multiple perspective, I think, and it doesn't change your claim or your thesis, but it's kind of showing how that frontier impacted whatever your frontier you're talking about, whether it's a physical boundary or intellectual, as we talked about in our first workshop. It's going to impact people differently.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, not to belabor this, but again, 0 years experience. So what you're saying is the other perspectives that you're bringing in are not necessarily counter to your claim, and you don't have to refute them. You're saying, you know, it's sort of, I don't want to say tangential, but like it's alongside your claim. You know, that you're just kind of exploring all avenues, but you're not refuting an opposite claim to your own.
And teachers out there, feel free to jump in on this one. So basically, your thesis, yes, it's making a claim. It's making a claim about, for this year, what was the frontier in history that you're talking about. So if you're talking about, let's say, the first, you know, woman to be in space, there's no, you know, there are things that happened. And that is a frontier crossed, but it's going to impact people in a different way. So it's not refuting a claim, but what it is doing is talking about how this frontier that was breached, that's impacting people in different ways. And so that's kind of where it is, the multiple perspectives of, you know, I
Or even like what barriers they had to face in the process to accomplish that goal could also help.
I just want to say, sometimes, I mean, it's, you know, the multiple perspectives isn't just so much a counterclaim, but you're looking at the events and the different people maybe coming from different angles who've all got their own personal agenda, things they're trying to get out of it, and they may be very, very different agendas. But you need to show, you know, you can show how those different sort of issues, ideas, you know, sort of were kind of interwoven into the you know, the events and how they influence the events and the outcome. You know, so it's not actually a counterclaim, but it's...
Right, so it's like that multi-pronged impact. I guess that's, I
Yeah.
think that's the word that you used, impact. I guess that's the way to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends on the context.
Yeah, I think that one of the most difficult things, especially with middle school students and late elementary school students, who are very concrete, it's critical to use this to try to get them beyond the stage of making a report. So if all you do is get your multiple perspectives, so you've got your historical context and it's really nice, but so what? So in your opinion at that point is, what was the impact in that, what was the impact that you're trying to show? And I think that's the important step, and I find that that's very difficult for middle school kids. But it's an important critical skill for them to develop. And as they get into high school, and those kids I followed from middle school to high school have told me when they were in high school, I am so glad I started this in like 5th and 6th grade. Because it takes a while.
Yeah, and when we get to the piece of it in our next workshop in January of talking about the rubric and the judging rubric, you know, we tell judges there are, you know, kids in 6th grade are not going to be able to be at, you know, the very top level because they're cognitively not there yet. But, you know, it's a process of working towards it. And I would also recommend to, we have under our student page, we have examples of projects, as does National History Day, and that's also a good place to go. And National History Day always posts also the paperwork as well. We just have the projects up. But, you know, you can look at those and you can kind of see how different students have handled it, and I think that also is helpful. Because, you know, the thing with History Day is there's no cut and dried answer to anything, right? You know, kids will say, how many primary sources should I have? And I'm like, depends on your project. You know, like everything is, nothing is concrete in that. And I think that's also a challenge. So, you know, I can't stand up here and say, well, you're going to put it in this section here, because it also depends on the student's topic, their project. And, you know, one of the things we really try to encourage with History Day is within a framework of being creative, because, you know, this isn't a multiple choice test. This isn't a standardized test. This is a chance kids can really express themselves. So you don't want to give kind of a cut and dried answer to stuff, because, you know, over my 15 years with History Day, you know, kids do amazing things and come up with some great ideas. So you don't want to, but I would recommend also looking at some past projects. I think that'd be helpful. Any other questions?